Cloud. What's
Thank
that?
you. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to let people in it all. Did you hear Lila start to play her violin?
Oh yeah, I was like, I don't know how you were focusing with that going on.
I just thought it was funny. And like, how are you starting to practice now?
It's an early time.
Yes. So I'll just give everybody a few minutes to trickle in, and then we can start. I can't believe it's Monday already. Let's see. I just want to be mindful of everybody's time. So maybe we can just start with introductions, and then that'll let some other people come in. I know that some people can't make it, and we're hoping we can record it, which we are doing, and we'll put it on our website maybe next week. So I'll start out. My name is Jennifer Evans. I am the COO of C.A.R.E, which is basically Companions and Animals for Reform and Equity. I am a Korean adoptee. I was raised by two white Americans in this country and came here when I was 3 months old. So we are doing our intros and introducing ourselves, and also adding one of the most racist or absurd things we've ever been told as an Asian American. And I would have to go with, I remember when I was younger and I was in nursery school, and all the kids used to sing this song, and it was Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these. And I remember doing it. There was like a whole performance with it. You know, you pulled your eyes back because Chinese people's eyes went up and Japanese people's went down, of course. And then you pulled your shirt out, which is, you know, not appropriate for nursery school kids. But I remember singing that song, and it literally was not until I want to say like 10 years ago that I realized that I was like making fun of myself. Like it kind of came and went. And then you start to think like, well, wow, there's children, were they making fun of me, or were they just singing a song? Like, were we too young to know what that meant? And so that's kind of a weird pain to think about, but that's probably one of the most absurd things as a young child. But I'm gonna pass it off to Alina.
Hello, everybody. My name's Alina Luna, and I'm a professor of English at Western Colorado University in Gunnison, Colorado. Actually just newly retired, so I'm getting used to that. Thank you. And I teach English. I did teach English literature. I was born in New Jersey. My parents came here from the Philippines in 1967, so during the Vietnam War. Which was fun. And I'm thinking of, I thought of actually, Jen, what you were saying, that Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these, and how shocking that was not to me at the time, right? Because children were doing it. The other thing that I remember is somebody saying to me, oh, you're Filipino. I heard your people are good thieves. And it was one of those moments where I was really caught off guard by that. And the person did not see anything wrong with that. And the other part of me was like, well, that's a stereotype I haven't heard. But yeah, that was, my people are good thieves.
Wow. Rainier, do you want to go?
Yeah, so hello, my name is Rainier. I'm the founder and chief brand officer at Lag Media. We're a strategic communications and branding agency that serves BIPOC creatives and progressives. So I'm Filipino American. I am a copywriter and an activist from the Bay Area. My family immigrated to San Jose in 1990. And I'd say that the most absurd thing that someone has said to me related to me being Asian American would be, it's more of like a prolonged campaign of messages of things that people would say, but it would all fit within this phrase of "I'll nuke you." Like they don't like what I have to say, so they would just drop in. I mean, my work is in social media and digital media, and so they drop memes or photos of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they'd post quirky, funny Hitler memes and just a lot of really racist, violent imagery. And so I always just thought, like, how messed up do you have to be to say that you'll want to genocide somebody because they called you out, or you said something racist. Two, how do you exactly like feel confidence in saying that, like, yeah, I have access to the nuclear codes? And three, I'm not even Japanese, so it's like doubly racist and not even understanding who I am. But yeah, I'd probably say that would be one of the more racist things.
Sheila, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sheila Kukan. I'm the new Chief of Engagement here at C.A.R.E. And my parents are Iranian. They came to the United States during the Iranian Revolution in the late 70s. And I was born in Massachusetts and raised in my little California bubble. But I'm trying to think of my incident. And I would say, I've gotten all the go back to your country kind of stuff, especially that came with 9/11. But the first time I was actually, I think, genuinely scared was I was living in Texas not too long ago. And I was at a restaurant and this guy comes up to me and he grabs my hair and he's like, "This is an American hair." And I was like, "What's American hair?" Because, growing up, it's like, it's the melting pot. Like, we're all American, right? Now we know there's problems with that. And he was like, "Either you tell me this is a weave or you're telling me you're not American." And so I was like, okay, this is right after the Muslim ban. Do I lie? And do I say that I'm not Iranian, or do I tell him it's a weave? And eventually I kind of just lied my way out of it. But I was like, it's the first time I actually like hid my identity.
Well, I never cease to be amazed at what humans can do and say. So I'm just going to go through a very quick intro of kind of the history of Asians immigrating to America. And I think then we'll just start off and talk about some things that we all know and have seen in the media that have really perpetuated these stereotypes. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I apologize for those of you that already know this information. And also, I am not a historian. This is just I think some facts that it's important to know, kind of to lay the groundwork with how we all got here and that stuff. So basically in the 1850s, we started to see an influx of Asians originating from China, Japan, Korea, India, and the Philippines that kind of migrated here. It's interesting, if people don't know, that we came here as contracted workers who basically labored on plantations. Most Asians were fleeing poverty or imperialism, and they came to fill the cheap labor. The major wave came with the gold rush in California and the Transcontinental Railroad. So what an interesting kind of statistic would be that in 1848, they counted about 400 Chinese immigrants. And by 1852, there were 25,000 that were here. So we can kind of see this groundwork for why Americans kind of were really, they wanted the cheap labor, but then they changed their mind, right? So around 1882, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act. And for those of you that don't know, this banned Chinese laborers from entering the United States for 10 years. It prohibited Chinese immigrants from becoming citizens. 10 years after that, it was renewed in 1892. And then 12 years after that, it was made permanent. So it marked the first time in US history that a federal law restricted a group from entering the country on the basis of race. Then in 1905, we had a group of, what's interesting, European immigrants, 2 Irish and 1 Norwegian, that created a group called the Japanese and Korean Exclusion League. It was later named the Asiatic Exclusion League because they wanted to make sure that they included Indians and Chinese immigrants to that as well. It was affectionately, I say that in quotes, known as the AEL. This group's methods were not restricted to violence against Asians to ensure the Chinese Exclusion Act, and they also spread false anti-Asian information or campaigns or propaganda that led to a kind of really appalling but not surprising reaction where General Ulysses S. Webb, the Attorney General for California, he basically started making a huge effort to enforce laws that prohibited all Asians to own any property in the country. The AEL, they framed a campaign towards the San Francisco Board of Education to exclude Japanese and Koreans from public schools, which later led to the segregated schools that they developed. And they were encouraging members to not employ any Asian people. In 1913, there was the Alien Land Law, which basically prohibited any aliens of an eligible citizenship to own anything. It was later amended and made sure that there are no loopholes to allow any Asians to gain membership. So we kind of enter the, the 1900s now, where, you know, we're out of propaganda and we're more developing into movies. And I'll start out with the first movie, which was 1927. It was called Mr. Wu. And what some people won't know is that most of the Asian characters were played by white people. There's a term called yellowface, just like blackface. And so, you know, we have this repeated kind of stereotype for Asians, where we're deceitful, we're cunning, we're servants, we're stupid, and we are our eyes, we can't see out of our eyes, and we laugh really high pitched. So it's that movie was 1927, and they probably said the word chinks a million times. And, you know, there are constant phrases throughout the movie that portray racism through it, where, you know, where people may not say that they thought that, but if you hear like, oh, you Chinese people eat the silliest food, you know, that's the kind of microaggression that you kind of absorb. So what I thought was interesting in my research was this actor, Lou Chaney, loved to play Asian men. And that's like a whole nother thing I could go down on another day. But I don't know if any of you have a movie, you know, that has struck you that is stereotypical and kind of problematic.
I don't necessarily have a movie, but I would say that it's more of a genre, or maybe even a class of characters. I was around you know, early college when I started to really ask myself, like, okay, I feel these things about being Asian American because of what people were leaving comments on my content. You know, I was blogging in high school and college, and people were just always posting racist comments and talking about what Asian men are like, or what Asian women are like, and determining the qualities that they thought about us based off of how we looked, based off of our culture. And in looking at where a lot of this comes from, I stumbled across the origins of Fu Manchu and just this caricature of Fu Manchu, because we've seen, you know, the iconic Fu Manchu mustache, you know, the wiry mustache that's long, and you know, the beard that's long, and we see that character throughout media, whether it's 90s cartoon shows, whether it's, you know, kung fu movies in the 60s, whether it's silent films in the early 1900s. Yeah, that right over there. And this entire genre, which is really interesting because it was developed by this writer, Sax Rohmer, but it expanded to be more like, you know, a public entity, in the same way that anybody could write about a vampire, or anybody could write about Frankenstein. And so you'd have multiple writers and creators invested in this caricature of this Fu Manchu, to the point that he was completely stripped away from being anything that was, you know, related to real Asian culture, and instead just became a vessel for white politicians or white writers to create these really sensationalized narratives about Asian men being sexual predators, that they were constantly interested in invading the United States, not only politically, but sexually or economically, or in the labor force. And it's just so interesting how much this Fu Manchu caricature rides along a parallel path with American imperialism and colonization, and you know, our trends throughout the wars. Every time there's a war, the visuals of the Fu Manchu changes. Like he can be more Chinese or he can be more Japanese. And so I've always been fascinated with this category of character that spans books, comics, movies, video games. And so I'd say Fu Manchu is probably the, you know, a cornerstone of where a lot of this racist media narratives come from.
Yeah, and that makes me think too of what I find very interesting about Asian men, right, is either that they are lascivious, right? That comes to mind with what Rainier was just saying, or they're asexual, right? They are just dispensaries of ancient wisdom, and they have, and I think also of Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill, you know, and that how that came up in martial arts, but you know, the stroking of the long beard, right, and teacher or master, but no sexual threat there. Then the attacks also on Asian masculinity, right? They're not real men. So much so that, you know, they will, all these, you know, hateful and derogatory things are said to comment on anatomy, right? And that, but then you have Asian women, right? Dragon lady, lotus blossom. They're always like this kind of polarized opposite. So that they're always, in some ways, it makes me think almost of the Madonna whore kind of dichotomy that comes up, but within an Asian sort of frame. But it just becomes, the Asian body just becomes this receptacle of Western white fantasy, right? And if you can, you know, if Asia doesn't have real men, then we can go into Asia and conquer Asia, because it's only women who are guarding that land, right? And they and look at how obedient the women are. Look at how submissive they are. You know, those are, it's a fascinating, right? From an intellectual aspect, it's a fascinating sort of study on that, but it's very difficult to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, Asian women are hypersexualized for sure, you know, and I used to bartend, and I won't say I quit bartending because I couldn't handle it anymore. But yeah, the comments and the assumptions are pretty painful. I wanted to bring up this movie and then we'll move on, The Good Earth. So I don't know if anybody's read the book or seen the movie, but again, you know, another white man is playing an Asian man. But what is interesting, which I never knew, but not surprising, is Anna May Wong was considered the lead role there. But because they cast a Caucasian man, they needed to have a Caucasian wife. And so they proposed that Anna May Wong play the only villain in the story. And her response was, I won't play the part, but you're asking me with the Chinese blood to do the only unsympathetic role in the picture featuring an all-American cast portraying Chinese characters. So she refused it. And, you know, it was, I think, one of the first times or the first real examples of casting discrimination. So that was 1930. I will say James and I tried to watch the movie because the book is beautiful, and I didn't make it past like 25 minutes because I couldn't take it. And you know, I think, you know, white Americans maybe won't understand, but you know, watching a bunch of white people play Asian people and laughing and bowing and this high pitch like that's all you hear throughout the majority of the movie. And at that point, I just kind of turned it off. So I, you know, we started talking about different times in history. So there's the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and World War II. You know, Lena, you talked about how you came onto this country around then. Like, what are there any things that you can remember in the media, in the movies, in shows that reminded you of that time, or when? Because I do know that MASH, I think, was probably the only big thing that was out right after the Vietnam War.
Yeah, I you know, I've really learned, and this might also go back to the intro, to I've learned to be very cautious around Vietnam veterans. And not all, right? But it's been my experience to watch out and to be to keep my distance. Just because the nature of the war, right? How fraught it was politically. I remember just running into a Vietnam veteran in a bar. I wasn't even doing anything. And he looked over at me and he said, you know, I really like to kill a gook. And it was odd because at first I was embarrassed, because then my white boyfriend had to kind of swoop in and rescue me. So it's, you know, it was playing on so many of these things, Americans coming in to save Asians and things like that, but then the violence that comes along with it. And when you look at that, when you look back at Vietnam movies, the atrocities that happened, how complicated again the issues were, but constantly just the rape that gets highlighted in films, you know, the ideas of the depictions of babies who are rigged, right, to blow up, also to perpetuate this idea that there's an inhumanity to Asians and in Vietnam War movies, this kind of underhanded, again, sneaky way of fighting, the jungle warfare, right? This idea that they should have been fighting a conventional war, which is really just code for American or Western, right? I think really does perpetuate a kind of either primitivism or savagery about that. And so, you know, when you see, I remember seeing once a bumper sticker that said, "I love the smell of burning rice in the morning." And this was in upstate New York. And I could not explain why that was such a fearful thing to me, to anybody else, because they could easily just say, well, you're not Vietnamese. Why does that matter? But it, they don't get how everybody becomes conflated and everybody becomes answerable for an ethnic group that they're not a part of, right? So there's great liability in that. There's real physical danger in that. And I think the representations or the lack of representation certainly does not do anything to mitigate those ideas.
Yeah, wow. So I was going to like after World War II, well, I'm gonna fast forward there, you know, I think it's interesting. I grew up and I think I was homesick for some reason, and I watched was watching HBO or something, and I saw, now I can't even remember the movie, I should have written it down, but it was the first time I was aware of the Japanese, and I say internment camps because that's how it was labeled in America. And I think it's interesting because since then, since 20 years ago, I've learned so much more about it. And, you know, internment, I think, is a term of endearment for Americans to kind of like co-opt that and what in reality it was. And it's interesting. I watched this YouTube video of this Asian man, and he called it an imprisonment camp. And it just, even that difference in one word, I thought was so important for me as an Asian American to recognize like how things have been whitewashed and made to look somewhat better, you know. So the idea, and I've talked to my kids about this, of somebody coming into your home all of a sudden one day and taking your family, you got to grab as many possessions as you can. And were they lined up and shot at? No, you know, but they still were, their possessions were gone. They were thrown in these camps. And I mean, camp is even a funny word too, but it's those were, you know, the 1950s and 70s. And I think I tried to look back and like what movies were out then. And it's funny, like, I came up with this list and, one I think is trivial. It's like the Disney movie, The Lady and the Tramp. And so I remember as a kid constantly, and we talked about this actually before we launched the call, this kind of feels weird and uncomfortable, like watching the Siamese cats, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Mickey Rooney. Like I was repulsed by his character. And so I am going to try to show and share that. So let's see if I can do this. Share screen. Let's see if we can play this.
Harry was the other guy. I'm Sid Arbuck. You like me, remember? Mr. Golightry, I protest.
Oh, darling, I am sorry, but I lost my key.
But that was 2 weeks ago. You cannot go on or keep ringing my bell. You disturb me. You must have a key made.
But it won't do any good. I just lose them all.
Come on, baby. You like me. You know you do.
I worship you, Mr. Albert. Good night, Mr. Albert.
Baby, wait a minute. What is this?
Well, that's a whole nother level of inappropriateness with the man forcing his way in there. But I remember watching that and everybody is like, this is the best movie ever. I'm like, and then, I would get to those parts and cringe, but I would never speak up. I would never say, this makes me feel uncomfortable, or I don't really like that. And why does he have buck teeth? And like, what's going on like in this? It's just, it's very interesting how I think, we've got these things going on in history. We have wars, we're blaming a culture, and then we're also creating movies that have these very stereotypical parts. And so I'm going to pivot this to Sheila to talk about like what that means for her in times of history, in times of war, and what's going on politically.
Yeah, I think it's interesting looking at how America really has decided to frame a group of individuals. And so for myself in history, I think a lot of what we're seeing with the stereotypes in the US are tied to the Iranian Revolution, which is when most Iranians came. And I think even as we were preparing for this call, it's like, well, AAPI month, is Iran, is the Middle East included in that? And then as I was digging into it further, the term Middle East was really created through British colonialism to create a sense of other, because we wanted to have like this vision of what Eastern individuals should be. And they didn't want the Iranians and Middle Easterners to fall into that. So they created this other group, but really we're Southwestern, right? And so just having that happen from the 1800s to now has really fed into how the media portrays us. And I think for myself, the movies I think about are things like Not Without My Daughter, where it was a mother who, her daughter was being taken to Iran, and the stereotype of the Iranian man is like, inhumane, really aggressive, angry, violent, and then the women being very, being people with very little rights. And I think of myself, one of my teachers decided to show that movie in high school, and everyone came to me and was like, I'm so sorry, I had no idea that you're abused and stuff. And I was like, no, that's not my reality, but I'm so glad that's what our school decided to show. But when you have that, and then you have movies like Argo and 300, it just continues perpetuating the very, very violent, inhumane context around Iranians. And I see it on social media. People are always like, oh, those animals. And so it's this desire to tie people to a action that's happened throughout history when we're individuals. My parents came because of the Iranian government and being exiled. So if you're telling them to go back to their country, where do they go? And I think it's so interesting because the United States wants to create this concept of what these people are, and then they also want to tie them to the government. But we all know we're, especially now, very separate from what our government does. And it's been an interesting way of seeing that. And then now we have the stereotypes, then they've turned the other side, and we're like, okay, so these Iranians are here and now they're money hungry. We have Shahs of Sunset, and the women are all, high maintenance gold diggers, and the men are just here to deceive you and get all your money here in America. So it continues.
Yeah, that is super painful. We I want to move on to like, the 90s and recent. So there's been an uptick in Asian hate and Asian hate crimes, and it's funny. It's like we were supposed to go to New York, and then a lot of things, but it's frightening to see the amount of Asian people that are being attacked. And I've actually started to become scared to go to certain places. certain stores to be alone by myself. I'm like, I look like a freak when I'm in the grocery store a lot, and I'm always looking around, like, is someone staring at me? I mean, I've definitely been accosted before in parking lots and told to go back to my country and whatnot, but now I'm like, is somebody going to punch me? Like, people are physically abusing like senior citizens. And so it really, it's a different place. I did not think I would be in 2022. I will say that. And so, and then I have two Korean children who, you know, I don't think they understand the dynamic of that. But I want to go to 1992 with the LA riots. And I think our country is very interesting. We have a great history of really pitting minorities against each other, because why not? That's easy to do. And so, Alina, I'm going to call on you to talk about the LA riots.
So I remember those happening, but also just footage, right, from what was going on. And it was clear that Korean shopkeepers and Korean business owners were pitted against Black and African American citizens. That was what the media tended to show. It didn't necessarily show, right, those who were white who were taking part in the riots. Maybe peripherally there were some Hispanics that were shown, but it was really about Black against Asian. And that had also been intensified by an earlier shooting. Now, what that became was a kind of standoff where the military and the law enforcement kind of just guarded the higher class neighborhoods, the ones with more money, and just let those other communities fight it out, which is really smart, right? We're talking about disenfranchised communities that comprised of people whom the majority does not necessarily want. And without having to do anything, they'll just take each other out if you just withdraw. So, when that happened, and it took a lot for them to pull together, but eventually that did happen. But the whole idea of Black against Asian, right, just really kind of fanned that flames of this idea, even too sometimes, of the model minority. How Asians aren't really minorities because they're more successful, they're more intelligent, and that kind of leads to that desire for whiteness, right? A kind of certainly an ambivalence about one's own identity, but also this disturbing sort of impulse to separate yourself from the BIPOC community because you're not a part of that, right? And it oddly can have literally to do with your pigment, right? The lightness of skin, because the closer you are to white, the more almost is this expectation that you are going to succeed. And so, you had there with the LA riots, you had people who were coming in to a new neighborhood. They were looked at as successful. That was fanning the flames of those who had been long politically and economically disenfranchised. And that in itself just kind of fostered, I think, this battleground and this animosity toward one another. And so that was a tragic thing, I think. Led to a lot of hate crimes, when really both communities were victims of similar political interests, right?
Yeah, it's interesting here in Baltimore. We don't have to talk about it, but that kind of stuff still exists here. So I say, James is an Afro-American man, like there are neighborhoods that we go in and I don't even get looked at or addressed. I'm often ignored. And it's It's not something I realized actually until I was like 20, you know, I didn't know that that existed. So, you know, it's really interesting to have a Black husband, you know, and to know that there are people in the community that hate me just because of what I look like, because I represent to them Koreans that are stealing, you know, or taking over in their neighborhoods, and they're running shops. And it's a really sad, weird place to be in. So I've gotten used to it, and there are places that we don't go, but it's just it's sad because, like, you know, on its face, it's like, for me as a minority, as somebody that's marginalized, like I feel like we should all be teaming up together, right? And kind of like continuing this thing that we need to say who's suffering the most. It really isn't important at the end of the day. So I would, you know, prefer people would just learn to get to know me before they judge me, and decide what I'm doing and who I stand for and what shop I own and whatnot. But it's kind of not the way it is. I was trying to move to like some recent things, because I think that when I grew up in the 80s. So for me, like, I grew up with 16 Candles. That is literally the movie that I think of. It's the first time I think that I was cognizant of, like, this is kind of not right, you know. And so Long Duck Dong is a character that I will forever, you know, feel uncomfortable with, because I grew up in an all white neighborhood. And so everybody watched 16 Candles all the time. It was like a marathon. And I had to sit there and endure that character every time with the gong sound, and, you know, his just, so it's really interesting to think about, you know, did we progress? I don't really know. I would say, so my question to you all is, what movie did, or I should just do movie, a show, or anything, like, spoke to you? I like, for me, I remember the Joy Luck Club. And it was the first time I saw something that wasn't, quote, stereotypical, that I could, even though I wasn't Chinese, I was like, oh, I see people that look like me. I see this beauty of family, and this complex relationship of what that looks like, the pains and the joys in that. But are there any movies that you all can think of, or shows or documentaries that you kind of like identified with, or that kind of like made an impact in your life?
I'd say for me, the movie that really kind of shifted my perspective was surprisingly Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, which I saw in high school. And I didn't really understand it at first, or why it made me feel the way that I did. At first, I thought it was just because, oh, the Asian guy who was the main character, well, two main characters, he gets the girl then. And high school, that was like priority one, why I liked it. But as I've gotten older, I've really seen just how ahead of its time it was. I mean, just from the perspective of media that shows Asian people that you can be who you want to be outside of the predestined sort of lane that is prescribed by your parents, because that was really the sort of crux of Harold and Kumar, is that they, you know, they had these expectations of them being these hard workers, but they wanted to be, you know, stoners, cool guys. And it was just interesting to see these Asian characters try to reclaim their identity outside of white people. It was also a good stoner movie. And it was early John Cho, so it was a pretty iconic film. But I think what it really symbolized to me was that we needed more media that, you know, portrayed more of the slice of life, portrayed more of the normal side of being Asian American, and that, you know, the answer and the antithesis to Fu Manchu and deep dehumanization it doesn't have to be Crazy Rich Asians. It doesn't have to be, oh, all Asians are glorious and amazing and powerful and rich and we can do everything. You can actually just have a film that's about Asian people who are relatable and nice and good people who have good morals and who have a good story. And I think that's what taught me.
I think for me, I can't really think of a positive movie or anything, but I think something that was really meaningful for me was Anthony Bourdain had his Parts Unknown show, and he did go to Iran. And it's so rare that probably any of us will ever be able to go to Iran just based off of government relations and everything. But when he was asked what was the most like kindest and most hospitable country you went to, he said Iran. And it was so meaningful to me because it's like, yes, we are really nice people who just want to take care of you and feed you. And that's a part of Iran that most people will probably never see because of the media's portrayal of the Middle East. So that meant a lot to me, for sure.
Love that show. I've always loved Everywhere He Goes. I love that you brought that up. Thank you.
For me, Joy Luck Club, even though sometimes that hurts to watch. Bend It Like Beckham is another one that I love. I felt like she knew my life. And of course, it was written and directed by Gorinda Chadha, who, you know, there was a depth that I saw there that spoke to my experience. It didn't matter that she was Sikh. She knew how hard it was to kind of navigate these two worlds and trying to make parents happy and do what it was that they wanted, but be respectful, but at the same time trying to acculturate and, you know, just, she was just trying to be British. I was just trying to be American, you know. So that really spoke to my own struggle.
I totally forgot about that movie. I have to say, so I want to ask this question because I think it's important, and then move to kind of a positive, like action-based side. But how has like Asian racism and stereotyping and bias affected you in your own career? And I'll start with Rainier on that.
I think when you get into the marketing and the creative professional industry, it can be so easy for Asian creatives to be completely dismissed because there's oftentimes this perception that the Asian mind is a linear, logical mind, and that we are programmed to be great workhorses, but not great leaders. We are programmed to be great technicians, but not people who can innovate. And so my early work in marketing and communications was workhorse, you know, and I mean, it was good for, you know, building up the fortitude to stand up to corporate BS, but it, you know, it weared me out. And so I think that, you know, that definitely had a big impact.
Sheila, what about you?
No, I think I've worked in animal welfare for a while, and I think a lot of time people will dismiss me as someone who doesn't want to get their hands dirty and get down with the animals because, you know, the Persian princess is too high maintenance to get there and clean kennels. But it's not true. I love to get, you know, in the kennels and help the animals and be very hands-on. But I think that there have been some opportunities that have kind of just been, I've been passed by for them because they would have entailed kind of a little bit less of a princess role.
Alina, I'm curious as your role as a professor.
Well, in higher ed, it's always a little bit strange because they want to be very aware and be on the forefront of cultural change and awareness. But at the same time, you're looking at an institution that is incredibly westernized, very white. In order for, I think, any BIPOC person to make it in academia, they have to be white until they can get their tenure, and then they start making waves. But at the same time, you know, it can be you are standing up to an institution, and they can say they want to change, but really not necessarily have any real intention of it.
So I do think it's important as we kind of define like what's going on and acknowledge that we leave our friends and allies with advice. I think words of encouragement, like how can they do better? What can you all do? You know, I will talk about two things. One, costumes for Halloween. Like it's just a think about what you're dressing your children in. It's interesting, you know, I have a photo in my parents' house of me dressed as an Indigenous person, as an Indian, you know, and I think my parents thought like because I was Asian, I looked Indian. It was very similar. It was very believable. And, I look back at that picture and think, I wish that we had known better. And so I think it's important to say, like, I acknowledge that those things have happened, but also I will not let my children do that. And more so on that, I've noticed, like, as a parent, and if you are a parent and you have children, it's so important to expose your children to different cultures, and that could be food, it could be clothes. We just saw Doctor Strange in the movies with the kids, and I appreciate there are Asian characters, and they're not all kung fu masters. They're just intelligent people, and they're loving people, and I just different is not bad. And I encourage you all, like, if you don't have any Asian friends, like, make some. They're not all, they don't all have an accent. They don't all just eat with chopsticks. There are things that go along with that, and there's a depth of I think knowledge, and I love, like, the more I learn about Asian culture and why they do things. It's so spiritual, and I really, like, regret not knowing more about that, but I think there's something that our country as Americans could really use by looking into that history. So I'm looking to you all to kind of talk about something that's positive, or a piece of advice, or something that you would like to leave with everybody on this talk.
I'd say to invest more time specifically looking into and supporting Asian creatives, Asian thought leaders, musicians, bakers. I mean, we're in a really interesting time where I feel like a lot of Asian immigrant second generation people who were told to go to law school or go to med school, a lot of them have sort of strayed off that path and started at a pretzel shop or got into baking. And so you're seeing really just this explosion of artists and creatives and people who are starting new businesses and nonprofit organizations. And I always think it's just interesting to see what these different communities are up to. And you can find that it becomes such this massive ecosystem of, I mean, whatever industry that you're looking for, whether it's animal welfare or marketing, or you want, a video editor, you can find somebody who is Asian American doing that type of work. And so I guess my bit of advice is to just be open to the fact that there are Asian people who are creatives and people who are in all sorts of fields other than just tech and law and medicine.
Alina or Sheila, do you have anything?
Sheila, would you like to speak?
I think, sure. One thing I would just say is, if you feel like you have a thought that comes to mind when you think of a group of individuals or people who come, whether it be from a current event, like, for example, Russia versus Ukraine, with what's happening there, like, try not to tie the people to the political event or to whatever, like, coronavirus being tied to people from Asian countries, like, really try to disconnect that, or even try to check yourself and be like, why do I feel this way? And realize that it's probably some kind of societal structure that has been placed on us from generations of government influence. But I think, like, Iran hostage crisis, if people would have stepped back and been like, oh, I'm asking for all these people to leave the United States, but I forgot to think about why they're here to begin with. I think if we could start kind of separating those and looking at people, yes, culturally, but also as individuals, that would be really a positive thing.
I would say that to please use your privilege as a platform for someone else. If they don't have that privilege, if they don't have a voice, and you automatically do by some luck, and everybody has privilege to some degree, then use that space and give it to them. There are so many people who just aren't being heard right now, and it's because of fear in many ways. But uplift other people, support them. Those in the BIPOC community, stand with each other. I think that there's a lot to be gained from that.
I love that. So there's a question in the chat from Christine Kim. So I don't know, Christine, if you're comfortable getting on camera. If not, that's totally okay as well. But I'd love for you to ask the question to the group.
Sure. Maybe. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you, and thank you to CARE for putting on this awesome event. I have not seen these two movies yet, but I hear about them a lot. Turning Red and Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I'm excited that there's more representation of Asians in mainstream media and feature films and big Hollywood blockbusters, but I'm also like a little bit reluctant to go to these films because I'm always like, am I going to be upset by what I'm seeing? Even if the reviews are like mostly positive, and it seems like some really thoughtful people are saying some like nice things about these movies. But I just wanted to get your opinion as people who are on this panel on Asian stereotypes in media.
Have any of you seen these movies, by the way? Because I have not seen either of them. So I can say as a mother, I know Turning Red is a cartoon, correct? And so the kids have seen some of it, and it's been praised. And is it a Disney movie, a Disney Pixar movie? I can't remember. As you know, portraying Asian people, you know, as lead characters, and kind of turning the course of like promoting, I think, puberty, which sounds crazy, but like growing up and growing of age. So on its face, I think I am excited about that part, but I have reserved my right to watch it just because I haven't had the time. But I am interested in seeing that, and I do feel your sentiment and kind of the immediate reaction of like, I need to pause and stop and see, you know, like just because an Asian person is in a movie or wrote a movie or directed a movie or whatever, it doesn't mean it's something that I want to see. I would say I had a very interesting reaction to when Crazy Rich Asians came out, and I wouldn't even watch it just because of the title. And I kind of got into like a debate with a friend of mine, but I'm like, this is, you know, another yet stereotype, and here we have it in the title. And so even though I don't think that everybody thinks that rich Asians are crazy, we're just enabling other white people to think that there are crazy rich Asians. And so that annoyed me. So what I did do was buy the book. I read the book, didn't love it, whatever. And then I did start to watch the movie and turn it off in 20 minutes. So I just like, I do want to do my due diligence in that, and make sure I'm reading and watching, and did I miss something? But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of like, I don't want to say our job, but like what we do, you know, we're cautious about those things that come out, and we're used to being defensive about it. So Christine, yeah, I'm interested in watching Turning Red, and I probably will because of the kids. And I have not seen Everything Everywhere All at Once, but I have been intrigued by that, and I actually am going to add it to my list this week. I did want to ask, have any of you seen the movie Gook? And I think that's just the title of it. You have. So
I saw
Rainier,
it.
can you tell me about it? Should I watch it, or is it going to be painful?
No, I actually think that you definitely should watch it. It was directed by Justin Chan, which I remember when he first started off on YouTube, making little weird skits. Then he came out with this, you know, a great, really subtle film about what it meant to be Korean American in LA in the 90s. I obviously won't spoil anything, but it really was a good movie. And I think that is an example of the type of storytelling that we can strive for, and sort of answering the question that Christine was asking. I think one of the luxuries that Asian Americans should have is the right to be able to make bad movies. You know, we don't always have to like make these bangers that are like, wow, like this is, I mean, Everything Everywhere All at Once, I heard is amazing, and I've been wanting to watch it. But at the same time, like, you know, we're gonna have some of these Crazy Rich Asian 2s and 3s, and you know, we're gonna have a lot of films that are gonna miss the mark. But I think that as long as we don't create an atmosphere where we feel like, oh, we messed up that one, we can't do it anymore, like Asians, like you're not marketable anymore. And I think that ultimately is a discussion that I think is really important to have, which is, you know, we should be able to continue to produce movies and not feel like we need to come out with these amazing blockbuster multi-million-dollar hits in order for us to keep our place. And I can sort of, I'm starting to see that with, I mean, especially with, Shang-Chi and all these big blockbuster movies. And I can tell that a lot of it also, conveniently coincides with this increased awareness of Asian Americans and, stop AAPI hate. And so people are trying to like get out there and show their support by watching movies, but I want them to see that like, all right, you need to extend beyond that. But yeah, I mean, I think I do come into a lot of these movies very skeptical, but yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go, Alina, go, please.
So this isn't about the major motion pictures, but I don't know if anybody has seen The Terror season 2. It's on Hulu. I haven't finished watching the season. I'm about 4 or 5 episodes in, but it starts, I think, on the bombing of Pearl Harbor Day and takes place in a Japanese internment camp. So it goes through the process of what happened, and it's I find it to be really interesting. And anytime I see a large cast of Asian actors, I think it's great.
Yeah, I just added it to my list. We have a long list of watching to do. So we're kind of nearing the end, and I do want to say we will publish, I have a list of resources, kind of like terms that you all can look up, some reports, books, and some documentaries. And just so you all know, PBS is airing something called Asian Americans right now. If you have PBS or you have access to it, it's a great docuseries. I think it's 4 parts, and it really touches on the history of Asians coming here and becoming Americans, the difficulties and the struggle, and kind of brings it to modern day. I encourage you all to watch that, but we will for sure share these resources. And I don't know, I really appreciate you all being here. I see that James is on, and I'm gonna spotlight him.
You don't have to spotlight me. God. It's so annoying. I only have a question that
Sure.
Yes, question I've asked myself, but like I love not love listening to all the suffering that you all have, because it's so similar and unique at the same time. But it seems to me, in particular in the Asian experience, not so much with the African American experience, because Americans, white and Black, really don't know the African diaspora enough to even surmise where I might have been from on the African continent, right? And so African Americans are kind of lumped in a African pot, as if Africa doesn't have this like super complex diaspora. But I think we all suffer from sort of the counterbalance of whiteness, because whiteness is the desire to escape from being Irish and being Italian and being something other than the lesser part of a European whole, right? So you don't want to be a European small country or whatever, a bad player. So white sort of like covers everything. And then minorities end up having to deal with the counterbalance of what that means, which means Asian, you get lumped into everything that means, right? And so it's like we're all caught up in this whirlpool of oversimplification, either for power, all for power really, and dominance. But it has often made me question about, because nomenclature is so important, what could be more important than our own names? And I'm wondering if any of you have thought about sort of rejecting the Americanism or the whiteism of your own names and thinking of something more traditional as a way to sort of say to hell with this. Like you can't none of us can colonize ourselves, right? We're all living here. We're all speaking English. Most of us, it's our language, right? Everything that I know is American. But as an act of sort of revolution. Changing one's name seems like it'd be pretty high on the list. So I'm just wondering if you've all considered that. And thank you, by the way, for being here.
I might be maybe the only one that has the most Americanized name, being adopted by two white Americans. I was born with the name Suki Yang, and I will say it's not that I never thought about changing it. It was more when I would divulge that information and share it, I got blasted all the time. So I kind of like suppressed it for a really long time. There was somebody that I knew that used to sing a song about it, and still in my brain. As an adult with two Korean children, I think about it often. There's also a lazy part of it where it's like, my name is Jen, like, do I want to go through all that trouble? But yeah, it's I think about it more recently than I have ever, about how I can own my Koreanism and bring that back and make sure that I highlight that and show my children that I'm proud of it. So it's an interesting, after you're being colonized and I think staring at the mirror and trying to figure out how to make my eyes wider for like the first 10 years of my life. Like if I ice my eyes, do I pull them open? I think it's a very interesting transition. So I came from one place where I was so resentful of how I looked. And now I'm kind of like proud of that. So I think it's a slow progression of what can I do to be proud of who I am.
Yeah, I could say for me, like, my last name can't really hide the fact that I'm Filipino. It is a very Filipino last name. And so I think I was in the reverse situation where I had initially grown up with people like making fun of my last name and saying that it sounded goofy and feeling like, I wish like I could just go by man, and I could just drop the extra syllables and remove the Filipino-ness from it. But I think as I've gotten older, it's aged more, it's aged better with time. And I feel like it's become, a signature, and the fact that you probably can only find one Rainier Manning in the world. So I like it.
I love that. Mary Lou, I see that you're on here, and I'm only calling you out in case you want to speak up. But there she is.
She is.
Or can I?
Do you have any thoughts on
Hey,
that?
Maddie Lou.
I have a lot of thoughts on the name.
I'm sure you do.
So when I came to the United States, I was born and raised in Thailand. Father is born in Thailand, migrated from China. Mother is Filipina. And when I came to the United States, when I was 16, everyone pronounced my name Mary Lou. And so I went with it. I didn't want to cause anything, and I just essentially assimilated. And it was only, maybe about 4 or 5 months ago where I decided I was going to own my name. And how it was pronounced when I grew up was because my name came from Maria Lourdes Marilu. So my name is Marilu. And so I started going through this transition period of owning my name as Marilu. And there were many friends who have known me for many, many years who, okay, have I been pronouncing your name wrong this whole time? And quite frankly, even with C.A.R.E, there was a transition period where maybe James and Jen first heard me as Mary Lou, then all of a sudden it became Marilu. So yeah, it's a statement for me to be proud and own where I'm from and not take on a pronunciation that was essentially just put on me. And I didn't stand up for it. So at the age of, the other end of the century, right? I'm not ashamed. Going on 58, that I'm, I don't think it's ever too late. So I'm proud about it. But James, I love the question because now I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to change my name even more.
Even more. I mean, I think there's something about not forcing people, but ultimately you're forcing people to recognize that you're an individual, right? That you may have assimilated some parts of me that I don't have control over anymore, maybe financially. I can't just leave the country and go find my place in Africa. And, you know, I'm part Native American as well. I mean, I would be living, split my body up and live in 6 places in the world if that, but name is so important. And I don't know. It's just something that often comes to mind.
Yeah, I agree. And my last name, instead of Chanrasmi, is Janrasami, which means moon rays. I'm very proud of it. But thank you, Jen, for calling on me, even though at first I didn't want you to.
Sorry. All right, so we're at 8:06, and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I really appreciate you all being here, and you know, it's Monday. It's a Monday. So I appreciate you all. Next week we have a call, and Maddie Lou will be leading that about, you know, I think our Asian leaders that are doing things that are amazing, that have had to fight a challenge, and they're succeeding despite those barriers. And then the following week we'll be having a conversation about transracial adoption and humans and animals, which should be really interesting. So I thank you all for being here. We will release this video if anybody's missed it. And if you have any questions, honestly, you can email, I'll put the email in the chat. It's equity@careawo.org. And if you didn't get a chance to ask your question, or you thought of something later, please send that to us, and we're happy to answer that. So enjoy your Monday, and yeah, we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.